Today's topic is communication traps to avoid. This is one of three, so there's going to be three parts to this. And I wanted to talk about them separately. So the three traps we're going to discuss over the next 3 weeks are generalizations, it's going to be assumptions, and the last one will be comparisons. And we're going to talk about those separately. And when we think about communication traps in the sense that we can get caught up having a certain perspective. We can get caught up having a certain mindset about people, places, or things, and it prevents us from being able to expand our thinking and our thought process. And we lose the opportunity to capture some of the opportunities that may be there waiting on us to take advantage of them because we have these preconceived notions about people, places, or things. And I want to make sure that as we become more confident and effective communicators, we don't fall into these traps. We understand a little bit more about the impact that they have on people's lives, and even you, if you fall into the trap yourself. So we're going to go ahead and talk about that. Generalizations. So when we think about generalizations, I'm going to start with a definition. I always like to give a definition because it's important to have a baseline of understanding. Whenever you see people debating about something, there's a tendency for them to have similar thoughts, but what they're doing is they're debating from two different baselines. And when you have a baseline of understanding, it allows you to be able to communicate and express yourself in a manner that if you realize that when I say, and I love this example, when you think about a couple, if you ask a couple, what is their romantic life like, or what's romantic to you? And the wife says, 5-star dinner, rose petals going to the tub, and, all of these other beautiful things that she would consider to be romantic. But then you ask the guy, and he says, we go to a movie, go to McDonald's, and then we do something at home that continues to have the fun or the party. So there's two totally different perspectives, and that can lead to debates, and people are going different directions on what they mean. So having a baseline of understanding is important. So generalize, according to the dictionary, is to make vague or indefinite statements, to put in the form of a general rule. Now, it also says that generalization is the act or process whereby a learned response is made to a stimulus similar to, but not identical with the conditioned response. So it's the active process whereby a learned response is made to a stimulus similar to, but not identical with the conditioned stimulus that you have. So basically what that's saying is that if we see something, we experience something, and then we see anything remotely related to what we experienced in the past, we assume that this new experience is exactly what we dealt with in the past. And that's something that we don't want to do. So you get into that idea of generalizing. But generalizing, there's a big tendency for us to generalize who people are, to generalize the type of individual someone may be based on what we may have heard from someone else, based on something that we may have seen on the news or television. And it's important that we get out of the idea of these broad stroke generalizations. I often hear conversations where people are talking about dating and relationships, and people ask the question, well, or they'll make statements like, I don't understand men, or I don't understand women. But the point is, you don't need to understand women or men if you are in a relationship with someone or trying to build a relationship with someone. You need to understand that person. So the experiences of all the women you may have known, all the men you may have known or seen are totally irrelevant to this person that you're dealing with right now. So you have to get out of the idea of making generalizations about people so that you can understand what's going on in the here and now with those particular people. Generalizations tend to be unfair, they can be dangerous, and they often come from limited perspectives, and they provide an easy way to avoid learning something new. When there's a generalization floating around, it's easy to just jump on that generalization versus taking the time to gain understanding and perspective that's going to help you understand what's really going on right now with this person. And people will often look at something that they've seen somewhere down the line or in the past, and they always assume that the next person is going to do exactly the same thing based on the generalization that has been circulated or floated around. Now, here are just a few examples of generalizations that people tend to make. All politicians are corrupt. Women are bad drivers. Old people are technically challenged. Teenagers are rebellious. There's a generalization that introverts are antisocial. And none of those are true when you look at the broad scope. So we can't assume that just because you've encountered a few people and assume that everyone that may be in that profession or everyone that's a woman or everyone that's an older person fits the description, as they say. So those are just some examples. But here's some reasons why you want to avoid making generalizations. Generalizations take you down a path of stereotyping and creating biases in your mind and in the mind of others. If you perpetuate the idea of generalizations, there's a tendency that as humans, we buy into the things that we're constantly fed. If you've ever heard a song on the radio that you didn't like the first couple of times you heard it, within a month or so, you find yourself bobbing your head to that song because they force fed that to you so much that you become desensitized to the things that you didn't like or appreciate about it, and you begin to accept it as quality music. So the same thing can happen with these generalizations where we begin to stereotype and form biases about people or about groups of people based on things that we've heard or even things that you may have repeated based on what you've heard. So it's important to be mindful of that. You want to also understand that generalizations can create a negative self-perception for people. If someone is constantly hearing that a group of people that they supposedly represent or are represented by in a negative light, it can cause them to feel as though they're invaluable. It can cause them to feel like they don't belong. It can damage a person's self-esteem. So imagine your child being in a classroom and the teacher constantly saying that students from your area just never do well in school. They always do bad things. Imagine the impact that has on a child, even if they don't come from that place or they're just close to it, to constantly hear that your people or your group of people or your personality type, the fact that you're an introvert, if someone constantly makes generalizations about you, it begins to wear on you. So if you make generalizations to your spouse, imagine how that eventually affects your spouse or your child or your sibling or even you. You could be the one that's being affected by generalizations. So we need to understand the impact that they can have on other people, affecting the way that they feel about themselves. And that can be really damaging. Generalizations can have a tremendous impact, and we want to avoid them because it can lead to social neglect and injustices. When people make generalizations about a particular group of people or an individual based on something that they've seen on television, it opens the door for hiring practices that can go awry, educational opportunities that can be not made available for certain people based on generalizations. Healthcare. There are situations where you cannot legislate someone's heart. You can make a law, but you can't legislate a person's heart. So we want to avoid generalizations so that we don't put people in positions where they now form these biases and stereotypes and begin to mistreat people based on a generalization in areas like hiring and education or healthcare or any other social construct that's important for us to be able to live our lives effectively and to be able to enjoy them. So the next thing you want to do to avoid generalizations is that understanding that it can diminish your empathy and understanding. Well, it's a potential reason to avoid it, not how, but it's a reason to avoid generalizations. Is it diminishes your empathy and your understanding. You become quicker, or we, if any of us do it. So I won't say you, but we, if we allow ourselves to get caught up in generalizations, it diminishes our ability to empathize with people. It's easier to just go with what everyone has already said. It's easier to just make an assumption because, oh yeah, I've seen that so many times. If this person looks a certain way, if this person behaves a certain way, even in a limited set of context, we make the assumption that they're going to be in this bad group of people. And that absolutely diminishes your empathy and your ability to understand people and circumstances that you might be dealing with. So that's a great reason to avoid generalizations. Cultural and racial tensions, that's a big one. That's a huge one when we think about generalizations. And all of us have seen this on some level where there are generalizations about people from a particular culture, a particular part of the world. And that has a tendency to create mistrust. It has a potential to create divisiveness. And it also at times can lead to violence when we make generalizations and do it in an environment where we're making it so public and promoting that mindset and behavior. The people who don't know how to handle themselves well will result to violence and do things that can really be bad. And when we think about the fact that some generalizations, when we think about cultural and racial tensions, people might say that black people are fatherless thugs, or that Muslims are terrorists, or that white people are racist. Those are generalizations based on something that may have seen that one or two people did, and they associate that behavior with everyone that might look like them, that may come from their area or may come from their region. But in reality, anyone from any group can fit into those generalizations. So we have to take the time to understand what's going on and not just generalize, because that can be very damaging to relations that we have with people. And again, getting back to that negative self perception, where you have some people living their lives in fear because of generalizations that have been put out into the world and causing people to feel uncomfortable walking in certain environments because they know the perception that people have of them unfairly because of something someone else may have done. So it's really important that we keep that in mind. And it also can cause missed opportunities. When you're in an environment where there are new people or someone new in the room, on your job, or wherever it may be, if you fall into the trap of allowing generalizations to steer and dictate your mindset and your behaviors, you could miss the opportunity to connect with someone that is holding the key for the next opportunity in your life. You fail to capitalize on the things that you can learn from them, being able to embrace the richness of their diversity, to understand new aspects of what their culture is like, where you might discover that it could be a place that you actually want to move to at one point in time or at some point in time. You might want to retire in a place where someone that's different from you, that when you choose to ignore the generalizations and embrace them as an individual, then you get to learn something new. So you want to avoid those generalizations because it can cause you to miss opportunities for connection with people. Now, what we want to do to try to avoid that, potential ways to escape the trap. The first thing I would say is to practice critical thinking. You have to think for yourself. You have to train yourself to question the assumptions. You have to train yourself to question the stereotypes that could be portrayed by your friends, by your family, by the media, or whomever it is that's in your life or in your circle. You have to not get caught up and wrapped up into what other people are saying. Analyze the situations and the individuals based on facts. What are the facts of the situation? What's the context of the situation that you're describing? The details matter. So make sure that you don't just follow the crowd. That's going to help you get out of the trap of generalizations. Make sure you ask questions. When you're in the environment where someone is making generalizations about people or about a group of people or about a situation, ask them questions. Try to get a deeper understanding. Ask them to provide examples. Ask them for the basis of their assertion. Why do you feel that way? What is it that you saw that made you feel like this applies in the situation. So allow them to elaborate and don't just go along with it. By asking them questions, focuses them to get out of that lazy mindset where they just use the easy assumption and generalize something based on what they may have seen or heard that may absolutely not be true at all in that particular case. So we also want to begin listening without judging. If you've already come to a point where you have been making generalizations about people, stop doing that and begin to listen without judging. Many times when people have these debates about certain sensitive topics, they listen while judging, so they aren't actually listening. So if you begin to listen without judging, it allows you to take in the personal experiences that people have had. You get to hear their stories, understanding their backgrounds, understanding why they may feel the way that they feel, and also get to hear how those generalizations may be impacting their lives. Because again, those generalizations have a real effect on people, even though we might casually say, well, let me not use that one. Yeah. So even though we might casually say introverts are antisocial, that can have a damaging effect on someone that's an introvert that's been struggling with being more social with people. So be careful with that. We want to make sure that we're careful with that. Listen without judging. And then we want to stop generalizing based on your own personal experience. And people will have a tendency to do that. You may have had 2 or 3 bad boyfriends, 2 or 3 bad girlfriends. You may have been married once or twice and things didn't work out. And then you begin to associate the experience you had with that handful of people with everyone in that group, with every woman, with every man. And that's so unfair. It's so wrong, it's dangerous, and it is divisive. So you have to really be careful about allowing your limited experiences to shape the way you perceive other people that might fit the description or look similar or be within the same type of group of the people that may have hurt your feelings, that broke your heart, that stole something from you. Just because one person stole something doesn't mean everyone that looks like them is going to steal. So we have to stop generalizing based on our own personal experience. And then expose yourself to diversity. These spaces are a great way to get to know people from different parts of the world, a great way to understand the challenges and the struggles that people deal with, to be able to hear the stories and understand how these generalizations affect people's lives on a real level, on a personal level, when they hear stories on the news and they know now if something is on the news, tomorrow when I walk outside my door, I'm going to have people looking at me funny. And then it's going to be very uncomfortable not knowing if someone is going to try to cause them harm or whatever that scenario might be. So expose yourself to diversity to be able to understand different backgrounds, different cultures, different experiences, whether someone is neurodivergent or not, people that might have disabilities, to understand what they struggle with, what are their challenges. I went into a space where there were a group of people with disabilities, and one of them shared the experience of working in a building where the bathroom door didn't work. You know, many buildings have the button to push so that you can open the door without having to touch it with your hand. And this person shared this experience that they had been trying for weeks and maybe even a month or so to get the button fixed because the door was no longer opening. And they didn't have the physical strength to open the door themselves. That's something I completely took for granted. I never imagined that there were people that didn't have the ability to open the door themselves physically. So we have to understand and be open to try to wrap our head around the possibility of what people are dealing with, to be empathetic to what's going on. And that's why exposing ourselves to diverse situations, diverse people, diverse circumstances that they may be experiencing to help us avoid the trap or escape the trap of making generalizations about things that we don't understand. And the last thing is to put yourself in their shoes. How do you feel when you hear people make generalizations about something that you belong to, an organization that you're a part of, a particular group that you may be associated with? How does it make you feel? So imagine the same thing from someone else's perspective, how they might be feeling when they get generalized and placed into this category of being a bad person, or being whatever it is that could be negative, that offends, that makes people uncomfortable when these conversations are taking place. So, just to wrap up, a few ways or potential ways, because there are other things to consider, but I just wanted to give a few potential ways to escape the communication traps of generalization is to practice critical thinking. You got to think for yourself and go beyond the surface. Ask questions. Don't allow people to just make generalizations around you and you buy into it without trying to understand why they feel the way that they feel. Listen without judging. When people are sharing thoughts, take it in. Sincerely listen to what they have to say, but also make sure you give them an opportunity to speak, and that you actually listen and not walk away because you have a preconceived notion about this individual. Stop generalizing based on your limited experiences. When you think about the billions of people in the world, you can't assume that all the women are going to behave a certain way, and you only met 3 that did you wrong. You can't assume that. That isn't fair. Expose yourself to diversity, diverse situations, and diverse people, and put yourself in their shoes, which essentially means that you become more empathetic to what's going on in people's lives.